Hello and welcome to this round 13 of GP Providence. I mentioned that we've got some talent in our feature match area. Hard to argue with this feature match that we've got. On the right of our screen, Owen Turtenwald, William Jensen, Reed Duke. You saw them in the feature match area last round. They're back in there. We have numbers next to all their names. Owen, the 10th ranked player in the world right now. William, the 14th. Reed, the 5th. And on the other side of things, you know, Paul Rietzl, David Williams, Matt Sperling. They have pedigree. Both these teams have a lot of pedigree in Team Limited. And you know what? I think we're going to be in for a great game of Magic. We're kicking things off here with Dave Williams versus William Jensen. Commune with Dinosaurs from Williams here. He is looking to be on green-white.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what kind of decks all of these players are playing, because I think we're reaching somewhat of a consensus on what kind of decks that you want for this team sealed portion. We've seen quite a few red-black pirates, which William Jensen might be running here. Green-white generally considered the Dino colors. I would imagine one of their teammates is running Merfolk. I think we saw Owen with Merfolk in the previous round, actually.
Yeah.
And Reed on red-white Dinos, maybe Matt on a similar.
And I know that Paul was on the Merfolk list for Rietzl, Williams and Sperling yesterday. Maybe he's chosen to run that back. We will find out soon enough. And it does seem that we got Pirates on William Jensen's side of things. Headstrong Brute coming down there. Can't block, and indeed at this point can't attack either, thanks to a very quick Pious Interdiction being thrown down there by David Williams. Not interested in messing around here, just dealing with the pretty sizable 3-3 before it can gain Menace due to having a Pirate buddy.
Yeah, I think Headstrong Brute's just one of the best 3-drops in the Pirate deck. Sure, it can't block, but I think you want to be aggressive here anyways. And if you have a Pirate to follow it up, or one, indeed on turn 2, it's going to have that Menace, holds up Pirates, Cutlass, and the like very, very well. The Menace plan keeping on going, though. Direfleet Interloper coming down and getting a +1/+1 counter thanks to Explore. And interestingly, a Knave getting thrown into the graveyard on that Explore. So apparently that not good enough, the Ruthless Knave for William Jensen. Meanwhile, Shining Aerosaur, well, there are a few that shine quite as much as that foil one that Dave Williams has under our lights. Here we see a second copy of the Knave there. That possibly the reason that the first one that went to the graveyard. They don't necessarily do a whole lot in multiples. They're both 3/2s for 3, of course, but one or other of them can sacrifice creatures, let you do cool things with treasure. So Dave Williams here, lots of land to work with. That means that even the more expensive dinosaurs that he's got available to him can get deployed fairly soon. Yeah, he's one away from that Precious 7 where you're going to see things like Belligerent Brontodon, Thundering Spineback. Those are the premium green-white dinosaurs you might see from him. But yeah, William does have a good board presence on his side. That Headstrong Brute, even though it has a Pious Interdiction on it, could get some value from that Ruthless Knave.
So just an attack for 3 in the air here. So presumably some follow-up from Dave Williams, because there's a reasonably large set of attacks going to be coming his way on the other side of things. He has a Pounce. All right. That enough to deal with the Ruthless Knave. This is... Oh, wow. Skullduggery in response to the Pounce. This fight might go a little bit differently than maybe Dave Williams had hoped.
Actually, I think he was targeting the Interloper there.
And more copies of Pious Interdiction. Looking at the list for David Williams here, he actually has 3 copies of the Pseudo-Pacifism in his deck. And that means that any plans that William Jensen had to be getting into the red zone in a major way have been blunted substantially. The life gain on top of the pacifism type effect, can't attack or block, pretty relevant here. But Ruthless Knave will be able to sacrifice those various enchanted creatures for a whole bunch of treasure fairly soon.
Yeah, Jensen just in a great spot. Even though 2 of his creatures have been 1-for-1 effectively, that Knave is just giving him so much option.
So he pays 3 mana, cashes in his... each of his creatures. He's got 4 treasure, though, so in principle we could see another spell from Jensen at the end of turn. Instead, untaps. Lots of mana to work with. He's got the only creature on the battlefield. Swings into the red zone. Quite happy with that.
Yeah, and remember, he can just sack 3 treasures at any time to draw a card should he be running out of gas.
Stormfleet Pyromancer, meaning that the only gas is gas being lit on fire in Dave Williams' direction. 2 points of damage from that as the raid trigger kicks in. But here's... Spoiler alert, there might be another copy of Pious Interdiction in David Williams' hand. In the meantime, though, Bellowing Aegisaur, 3/5 that has Enrage, but apparently also likes to walk along planks, even though that doesn't really work out very well for the Dino. These guys both playing at a pretty brisk pace here.
Yeah, the problem for Dave is that with this much mana open for Jensen, a Pious Interdiction is not going to gain any life here because he can sack the creature in response.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing Ruthless Knave here at its very best. I don't think I've seen a better Ruthless Knave in this format. 6 treasure now sat lying around for Jensen. That is 2 cards if he wants it, or lots of mana if he doesn't. Trades off the Ruthless Knave without sacking any treasure, and has a follow-up, relatively quiet one in Queen's Bay Soldier, just a 2/2 vampire for 2 mana.
I wonder if Jensen has a plan with all those treasures. I can't imagine he just forgot that he can draw draw a card by sacking 3 treasures with the Knave. Although it might appear that way because he seems out of gas.
It looks like Dave nearly accidentally drew 2 cards. It looks like it's been stopped in time, that there's not any big worries, but they're just going to make sure that that's all sorted out before we carry on with our game. So, in case he saw the top card,
right.
It looks like they're just making him shuffle his deck just to make sure that there's no awkwardness.
They're keeping the bottom 4 from commune with the dinosaurs, though.
Makes perfect sense to me.
Well, let's take a look at Huey's deck. Maybe he has a Revel in Riches to use all of those treasures for. I can't imagine he's running that in his deck, but it's possible.
Revel in Riches, an interesting one. Inspiring the play from Williams, and he trades it off quickly with the 1 creature that William Jensen has going on. Jensen's follow-up is another one of those brutes. So currently just a 3/3 headstrong brute that can't block, but in principle with a pirate it may gain menace. And on the other side of things, Steadfast Armor Saw, the 2/3 vigilance that at some point can, while it's attacking or blocking, deal its damage equal to its toughness to the creature that it is in a tussle with.
Yeah, 2/3 and not a great rate for a 4-drop, but man, this Armor Sword just does a lot of heavy lifting.
And a Shining Aerosaur to follow things up. The dinosaurs, they're beginning to get things going, but another Walk the Plank from Jensen means that he's got one of those creatures beat, and indeed a follow-up pirate such that he's able to swing in with the brute, get through some damage. In spite of everything that Dave Williams has been able to put together, some big old creatures, William Jensen just consistently getting damage through, and in spite of all of that treasure that he's just had sat there looming, the big deal that's really been going on is he's got a whole bunch of removal and just enough ways of attacking through.
Yeah, so Huey does have a Revel in Riches, but it's not in the main deck, so I think he might have just forgotten the Ruthless Knave has that extra text. Now, if we take a look at the Ruthless Knave, it kind of blends in if you look at its multiple abilities, so something they easily overlook.
So here we have Matt Sperling on red-black, a red-black seeming like a popular choice. Reed Duke, he is on dinosaurs, but rather than it being green-white, he is on red-white. So he has, one of the key hallmark commons, Territorial Hammerskull, in play, along with a variety of other dinos. Thrashing Raptors there, because there's another dino in play, is a 5/3 Trampler, and he's got a few other nice ones working for his team. But on the other side of things, Matt Sperling, he's got some stuff going on. He's had to face down the same sort of pious interdictions that Dave Williams has been working with, but still has a number of pirates in play, including a Lightning Rig crew, that every time he casts a pirate, they untap, and then the 0/5, whenever he wants, he can tap it to deal 1 damage straight to Reed Duke's dome.
Yeah, Sperling with the Fell Flagship is going to pump up all of his vampires, actually, so that Lightning Rig crew...
All of his pirates.
Correct.
Yes.
So that Lightning Rig crew could actually attack as a 1/5 if he doesn't want to, ping with it. He could also trigger raid with it and potentially get in some damage. It's kind of awkward.
These attacks, of course, with the Fell Flagship, they're pretty good on their own, but if the Fell Flagship chooses to attack at some point, it can force opponents to discard as well. Sperling getting a little bit of treasure there as some of his more disposable pirates, shall we say, hit the graveyard.
Yeah, that flagship just doing heavy lifting. Those 2 ones would have been terrible in the face of all the X3s that Reed has, but again, that flagship pumping them up to a 3-power creature means they are relevant.
And a Fire Cannon Blast clearing the way, getting rid of the Thrashing Raptors, meaning that all that's left on Reed Duke's side of the battlefield, well, at least for that brief moment, was a Territorial Hammerskull, soon joined by the Pterodon Knight. So it does have flying because there is a dino in play.
Oh boy.
Wow, if you're going to have 1 dino in your deck, this is the one that you want. Charging Monstrosaur, coming down, immediately attacking in. It does have haste. This is a rough spot for Reed Duke. Both these players on relatively high life totals at the moment, but it's Matt Sperling that has the creatures that are dominating this board.
Yeah, Fathom Fleet is currently 3/3 3/2 as the Fell Flagship's pumping it up. So Matt doesn't even have to invest any mana into his 2-drop to trade with any of these creatures.
And elects to save the mana that he has both from treasure and lands in terms of doing any pumping there.
And it's going to be hard for Reed to come back from this. Red-white not really known for having too many larger threats like that. Oh, but if you have 3 Pious Interdiction, why not?
Everyone's got 3 Pious Interdiction today. Who knew? Gains a bit of life, deals with a dino. You can see that basically this is exactly what's depicted in the artwork, is someone, just calm down, Mr. Dinosaur. It's fine. You don't need to be all fighty all the time. You can just chill with me. Pterodon Knight on its own, just a 3/3, needs a dinosaur friend before it's going to be able to start attacking in the air. And there is a great friend for our dinosaur, a Shining Aerosaur, meaning that we have a 3/4 flyer and a 3/3 flyer now for Reed Duke, and not too much in the way of flying defenses for Matt Sperling.
Yeah, Matt able to keep some damage pressure on with that Lightning Rig crew. He really needs to find something in the next turn or two, otherwise the flyers are just going to quickly end him.
And worth noting in terms of games ending, Paul Rietzl already dropping his first game to Owen Turtenwald. So the Peach Garden Oath team, Turtenwald-Jensen and Duke, just 1 win from Duke away from a sweep of game 1s. Mm-hmm. Of course, you do need to get 2 match wins in order to win the series and advance to 11-2.
Yeah, as Chet has noted, the Pious Interdiction creatures can still crew the flagship, and so on the turns where Reed only had that 3/3 Pterodon, he was able to, Pterodon Knight rather, he was able to crew the flagship, potentially get in.
Wow, some big old dinos getting involved for Reed Duke here. He's got a Burning Sun's avatar, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to target opponent and up to 1 target creature. And there, the best options available for Duke were to kill off some Pious Interdiction creatures. But a 6/6 still on the battlefield for him, and that will be one that can attack in very powerfully in the next turn or two. Matt Sperling, well, he's got an awful lot of mana up, so in fact the little pirate that he's played out there may prove to be better than it first appears. Fathom Fleet Firebrand, the one that's a constant tongue twister to us in coverage, does come down with 7 lands untapped plus a couple of treasure, so potentially representing 4 extra pumps?
Yeah, but that's not entirely relevant when Reed just has a 2-turn clock in the air alone, and the 6/6 Burning Suns, even though it can trade away with one of the smaller creatures from Matt, there's just too much pressure still.
Yeah, Matt very much on the defensive here, and neither of these decks really put together to be defensive powerhouses, and that could be all she wrote there. Unfriendly Fire just to finish things up, and it's a clean sweep for the Peach Garden Oath in their game 1s. 1 win for Owen Turtenwald, 1 for William Jensen, 1 for Reed Duke. They do, of course, need to find 2 match wins in total to get through this. And we get a chance to look in on Paul Rietzl versus Owen Turtenwald, and as suspected based on the way that we saw the other games going, this is the Merfolk Mirror. A Jade Guardian for Owen Turtenwald, already with 3+1/+1 counters. Looks like there's been a few little tricks to put extra counters on here, but a pounce from Paul Rietzl, keeping the board relatively quiet. And one thing to note for Paul Rietzl's board, it's entirely unblockable.
Right, and this is how we've seen a lot of the Merfolk matches going. There's not a lot of trading or blocking. It's just, who's going to race who first.
Air Elemental coming down post-combat for Paul Rietzl there. The 4/4 flyer, not a Merfolk, but definitely getting a pass into this deck because it's just a really sizable body in almost every circumstance. In this case, not the biggest creature on the board, but the fact that it's got flying means that all of Paul Rietzl's attackers are going to be able to get stuck in, and he's got, 4, 7, 8. If he's got a Merfolk to pump his River Sneak here, he could just do 9 damage without even the potential for Owen to block.
Yeah, Owen, of course, passing with 6 man, a lot of access to tricks in blue-green in the Merfolk deck, so I'm not sure Paul is going to be entirely too tempted to just, play the Merfolk, pump up his River Sneak and say, well, I must win here. But the thing is, Paul doesn't die on the backswing in one attack, so.
And there could still be a Flash Merfolk in here in order to end things after block, as a Windstrider here is great to pump the River Sneak. Surprisingly, Windstrider does come down for Owen Turtenwald. That would be enough to block Air Elemental. And it looks like that, we have an answer for that one in the form of a bounce spell from Paul Rietzl. Depths of Desire there to return the blocker to Owen's hand and indeed generate a little bit of treasure.
Oh, wow.
It turns out it didn't matter. Owen Turtenwald dropped to 1. 1 is not dead, and that meant that with a River Herald's Boon, an additional 2+1/+1 counters, just enough to mean that Owen Turtenwald, in relatively quick fashion, taking that first match. And we get a chance to jump back across and see more of Dave Williams versus William Jensen. These games have been going thick and fast, and if you're looking to learn about how this format works in an ideal fashion, because all these decks seem very strong, it's aggressive, it's quick. You need to be doing things in the early turns of these games, or you'll just fall too far behind.
Oh, yeah, as we saw in that Merfolk match, it was just haymaker after haymaker. Owen played that beautifully, opting, not to do anything because he wasn't taking lethal from Paul. He was only going to fall down to 1. End of turn, he played that Windstrider to threaten lethal. Paul did have a bounce spell, but Owen did find another trick in the form of River Herald's Boon to get in those last 2 points of damage. So, well played on both sides. Again, just came down to racing each other in that Merfolk mirror.
Alrighty, so in this game, Dave Williams has an Emissary of Sunrise, though by the looks of things on the Explore, he did not get a +1/+1 counter. Follow things up with an Inspiring Cleric there to gain 4 life. On the other side of things, we have a Headstrong Brute for William Jensen. And then also, he's got a Pirate in play. We don't know whether or not he was able to secure a raid and make a discard there, but just having a Pirate on the battlefield does mean that Headstrong Brute does have Menace. Deadeye Tormentor there, just a 2/2 once it's in play. And now we see another one coming down. He will get that raid trigger. Because the creature's attacked this turn, Dave Williams, he's going to be forced to discard a card.
Yeah, pretty annoying for the Dinos deck, as oftentimes they're holding on to more expensive creatures, and if they're discarding land, then it's going to be harder for them to hit those creatures later on.
Emissary Sunrise, the 2/1 first striker getting stuck in here, and the follow-up, it's the shining, glistening, gleaming, shining Aerosaur, and that's a big enough creature that it's going to be a problem for what William Jensen has going on before you even worry about the fact that there was an immediate Savage Stomp to deal with the Brute.
Oh my.
Wow, we were talking earlier on about some of the greatest splashes that you can have in this format, and this is one of them from William Jensen. Such a problem, Hostage Taker, because not only does it initially remove one of your opponent's creatures from the battlefield, if William Jensen gets up to the requisite 5 mana, he's going to be able to cast that Shining Aerosaur, and once it's been cast, there's no getting it back in any easy way for Dave Williams.
And this is going to be the turn that Dave needs a removal spell, but Huey, knowing that Williams just used a Savage Stomp, might not have another one. So, like you mentioned, as soon as William hits that 5th land, he's almost certainly going to cast that Aerosaur, because that's the safest thing to do with Hostage Taker. If you're able to steal a non-token creature, or a non-token permanent, and immediately cast it, then you're just safe from getting blown out later on.
A Legion Conquistador for David Williams doesn't even go for the search. That's signaling to me that there's probably another one in hand. It's pretty unlikely that you'd be looking to play too many of them as a lone copy in your deck. Just a 2/2 Vampire Soldier for 3 mana. Though he's kept 3 mana open, so we will find out what that's for soon enough. Dave Williams, known for his ability to navigate the mental game very, very well. He's got great at reading his opponents, figuring out what they've got going on, and indeed sending messages that are tricky for opponents to figure out. Well, no 5th land, that meaning that William Jensen just having to content himself with throwing down a couple of creatures there. Direfleet Captain, the 2/2 that gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other attacking pirate when it attacks. And of course that Fathomfleet Firebrand.
Yeah, even though Williams only playing 2 mana 2/2s, all of them are very threatening on their own. The Captain, of course, getting larger, you can see on the screen there for each other attacking vampire. The Fathomfleet Firebrand being able to pump up later on. It just lets them trade so effectively for larger threats.
Yeah, Pious Interdiction dealing with the Direfleet Captain and indeed buffering Dave Williams' life total. But here we see the Fathomfleet Firebrand just blocking and successfully trading by the looks of things with Legion Conquistador.
I think Williams pretty happy with this. He has a grip full of cards in his hand, and he has that Shining Aerosaur should he be able to find one more land.
Yeah, there we go. Gets to cast the Shining Aerosaur from underside Hostage Taker. And now he's the one with the 3/4 flying dinosaur in play. Looking just incredible. Looking a bit menacing, actually, in foil. Getting a bit of purple coming through on the lights once it goes across to the piratical side of the table. A kind of flavor theme, even with our lighting here in Providence.
I think I misspoke on the Direfleet Captain. I think I said pirate, or rather vampire, but it is, of course, pirate. Huey is.
It's an orc pirate, so it's got some pointy teeth.
Sure.
We can see where that came from. All right, Jensen, just considering his plays a little bit here. These guys have bags of time. Still about half an hour left on the round. Ultimately, we have a skullduggery clearing a path there, and meaning that even more damage coming in. 2 lands in hand for Dave Williams. He scoops his cards up, and you know what? 30 minutes left on the round, and William Jensen and Owen Turtenwald picking up the win. Very straightforward stuff for them. When Matt Sperling wrote his power rankings for all of the teams in this competition, he had the team of Peach Garden Oath number 1 with a bullet, and this is exactly why. These guys, just an absolute force. On average, they have over 20 GP top 8s each. When you put it together, those numbers, they tell a story, and that story is, this is the team to beat in this room.
Well, they did win the last Team GP together, so...
Came into this day 2 with some work to do, though. On X and 2, that very much the sort of place where you end up having to battle a little bit. We're just going to see the last few moments of Sperling versus Duke here. Ultimately, not going to impact the outcome of the match. But you know what? Really wants to get a little bit more game in with his deck. Looks like they're just showing off the hands that they had at the end of that game. Not entirely clear how it would have gone, but you know what? Reed doesn't mind too much because these guys picking up the win. We will, of course, have more Magic for you soon enough. We have got a time walk match all ready to prepped to go for you. So stay tuned, and we'll be back for more Magic right after these messages. Hello and welcome back to GP Providence. I'm Tim Willoughby, that's Kenji Igashira, and even though our live match is all complete at, might I say, a blisteringly fast-paced, crazy quick, that does not mean to say we do not have more magic for you. We are going to jump briefly back in time to see the start of another one of our matches from the feature match area. Let's head back down to see a little bit more from this round here at GP Providence. So now we have Stanley Pace, Jared Calabrese, and Brian Wilkins. They are up against Michael Hopkins, Phil Lee, and Juan Lodra. Let's get a chance to see a different take on this Ixalan team sealed format. The Ixalan team sealed decks, they're going to be a super high power level, and I think that they represent a good example of what you might want to try and achieve if you're drafting. Very high on tribal synergies. We'll see exactly which tribes are represented here. It may be that we have potentially another blue mirror of sorts. We've seen Merfolk bashing against Merfolk a fair amount, but actually, looking at the lists here, Michael Hopkins, he's on kind of a sweet one. It's blue, red, pirate, and he's got a couple of the hallmark uncommons, a couple of copies of Marauding Looter, so he's going to be digging through his deck real fast. Yeah, Looters is just such a powerful card. I think on initial read, you think that card is just loot once, but no, that is every turn if you've attacked with a creature, as it does have raid. Siren Lookout coming down there. Finds a land, so just a 1/2 flyer for 3. Not exactly where you want to be, but you know what? Sometimes you just need to hit those lands, and ultimately, for Michael Hopkins, getting extra cards in hand might be of slightly additional value. If he can get those Marauding Looters on board, he can simply discard them and turn them into real cards later. Yeah, you were talking about draft earlier. The power level of sealed is so much higher. I'm really interested to seeing how the top 4 draft goes, as, well, hate drafting is going to be much more of a thing, and your card quality is seemingly going to be much, much worse than the power level of these decks we see here. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Potentially a few more cheeky splashes. Treasure might be much more of a factor. Water Trap Weaver there, buying a little bit of time for Stanley Pace as he tries to get something going with his blue-green Merfolk deck. That his first play, but now up to 4 mana. Pretty much everything in the blue-green Merfolk deck tends to top out at about 5 mana. Windstrider maybe being about the most expensive spell you normally see cast. Just an attack here before combat. Both these players kind of on the go slow a little bit in the early turns, not getting too much going with their plays. Let's see whether or not there's something from Pace after combat. This is the turn he would love to see a Jade Guardian if he had one. Well, he's got Kapala. Kapala, Warden of Waves, kind of an interesting one. We got ourselves a Reader. It's a 2/2 for 3 mana. Spells your opponent's cast that target a Merfolk you control costs 2 more to cast. And abilities your opponents activate targeting a Merfolk you control costs 2 more to activate. So realistically, it may be that if Michael Hopkins was planning on interacting with removal spells, that those have been put on delay. Yeah, Kapala's really, really annoying. It's going to stop Hopkins from doing a lot of the things he wants to do. Yeah, let's have a little brief look at what Hopkins has going on. Fiery Cannonade might not work out quite so well for him. Even something like Stormfleet Pyromancer, the ability on it targeting, you would still need to pay 2 to make that work. And here we see he's cast a Stormfleet Pyromancer. I don't believe that he's got the extra 2 mana, though, so it's just... I don't know that should necessarily have worked that way. Abilities your opponents activate. I apologize. The distinction between the triggered ability and an activated ability, making all the difference there, meaning that Stormfleet Pyromancer was able to take down Kapala, and the turns where you cast a Stormfleet Pyromancer and it doesn't get to do its thing, i.e. no raid, are not fun turns for the Pirates deck. Stormfleet Pyromancer is just such a nice card. Yeah, you do have to enable raid by attacking, but frequently, because you're able to attack him with smaller creatures, or the Stormfleet Pyromancer deals 2 damage, you can attack with smaller creatures into larger threats and then still finish them off. So how's Stanley Pace going to get back in this one? At the moment, the life total's still pretty high, but he's not got too much going on the board. Elects to play a Jade Guardian. It's the 2/2 with Hexproof that when it comes into play, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on a Merfolk. It buffs itself in this instance, and that's a pretty safe place to put that counter. It means that if there's removal coming from Hopkins, then he's not going to get punished for putting it on a creature that's a bit more vulnerable. Yeah, this is exactly where Stanley wants to be. He's winning the life race, and now that Jade Guardian, if he has any way to suit it up with more counters, enchantments, or just otherwise buff its power and toughness, he's going to be in an excellent spot. Alrighty, so the Jade Guardian just sat back on defense for now. Unfortunately, doesn't really tussle too well with Stormfleet Pyromancer just yet, but 1 blue mana up, and we have seen from some of the Merfolk decks, they get to do some nice work with Dive Down. If he had that one, then he would be able to give an extra bit of toughness, meaning they could fight the Stormfleet Pyromancer even at the moment.
Yeah, the only thing he'd have to be worried about is like a sure strike. If he goes to block the Stormfleet, uses the dive down defensively, and Michael has a sure strike, then he just gets completely blown out.
For now, at least, Michael Hopkins happy to get stuck in here. It seems likely on the face of things that there wouldn't be a block from Pace. Not really looking to trade there. And Pace does take the damage. What will the follow-up be? We got a few interesting options here. I kind of like passing because there is a Wind Strider in hand for Michael Hopkins as well as some counter magic, but instead he gets to use his mana efficiently in a different way. Stormfleet Aerialist, and I believe that he does have counter magic in hand. He's got a Lookout's Dispersal, which will cost a little bit less. As things stand, though, we have a mythic rare on board, one that we've not seen yet this weekend, Rowdy Crew.
Yeah, I think Marshall and Maria had it in one of their matches, but Rowdy Crew, on the surface, 3/3 Trampler, but he's going to get to draw 3 cards and then discard 2 at random away. And should they share a creature type, or just a card type, that Crew is going to get a lot larger.
Well, it looks like we have
the Dispersal and the Wind Strider.
They can both be played at instant speed,
That's
but
true.
they're not both instants. The creature with flash and the piece of counter magic there. Ultimately, the Rowdy Crew, a 3/3 with Menace, still pretty good. Sorry, with Trample. Apologies.
Yeah, that's got to be unfortunate for Michael. I think those are 2 of the more impressive cards he wanted to keep.
You can't win them all, but so far Michael Hopkins' team, and indeed, of course, Stanley Pace's, have won 10 out of 12. A nice place to be at this stage in the tournament, though clearly looking to finish out their weekend with a few more round wins so that they can potentially trouble this top 4.
Yeah, that was a great turn for Michael. He was able to develop out 2 larger threats. The Crew still trades away with the Jade Guardian on the surface of things, and Airless 2/3 flyer is not bad.
Alrighty, Rue, let's see what Stanley Pace can put together here. Often these Merfolk decks, the way that they close out games is by making a creature that's tricky to block. Now, at least for Red-Blue Pirates, they have a lot of flyers, so one of the paths to victory of simply flying over what opponents have going on, not quite as straightforward for Stanley Pace as it might have been in other rounds.
Yeah, this is going to be hard for him to outrace at this point. He was looking really good the previous turn, but Michael developing out those 2 creatures, having more evasive threats, just the opposite of what the Merfolk deck was trying to do.
And in the meantime, he's actually in a position where the evasive threats of Hopkins are ones that he can't block. So, yeah, a racing situation is actually kind of a tough one for him here. Interestingly, looking at the list of Michael Hopkins here, he has 2 copies of Fiery Cannonade, 1 in the main, 1 in the sideboard. So after sideboarding, he gets to absolutely wreck the non-pirate decks. And in this particular matchup, well, I'm guessing that one's coming in.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, the only non-pirate card we've seen from him is the Wind Strider, which survives 1 Cannonade by itself.
And now a little attack here from Stanley Pace, threatening some kind of a pump spell. Michael Hopkins on 16 may just elect to take it this time.
Yeah, that seems to make sense. I mean, you have a 3/3, your opponent's attacking a 2/2 into it. The Merfolk deck, pretty known for having a lot of tricks. Not too many raid things you would have to worry about in a blue-green deck. Sure, they might have some flyers, of course, as you do have a Stormfleet Aerialist of your own there, but this might just be trying to push some damage and, well, tell your opponent, you better watch out, I do have something.
Not afraid of the Navigator's Ruin, then?
No.
One of these days I'm going to draft that deck and it's going to be sweet, but...
If you get the Fleet Swallowers and the Navigator's Ruins, no, I still don't like your deck, Tim.
We'll see. River Sneak and Navigator's Ruin, just get that. For another day, perhaps. As things stand, Michael Hopkins dropping to 14, and now we see what kind of offensive he's going to apply here.
Oh, man, just a grip full of cards for Michael over there.
Now, one interesting one that I just spotted in his hand that I'm intrigued to see what he's going to do with. He has the ability to search up equipment and indeed other bits and pieces with a Deadeye Quartermaster. Typically, you wouldn't run it if you didn't have something good to find. As things stand, kicking things off with a Raptor Hatchling here. The Hatchling, good enough that even if you're not really planning on being a dinosaur deck in the main, you do have nice options with it. And of course, It plays very nicely with Fiery Cannonade.
Yes, absolutely.
You do not mind dealing 1 damage to the Raptor Hatchling, getting a 3/3 trampling dinosaur when it takes a point of damage.
Yeah, Raptor Hatchling, just a very annoying card in this format. Again, players are trying to race each other, and there are actually a decent number of X1s in this format. X1s being, any creature with 1 toughness. Raptor Hatchling can jump in front of them and produce a 3/3 trampler for you.
All right, here's that River Herald's Boon. We were talking about the tricks available to Merfolk. This kind of the premium one, because it lets you put a bottom horizon counter on any creature and then an additional one on a Merfolk, all at instant speed. This is one of the ways that the Merfolk deck ends up winning all sorts of different fights.
Yeah, the problem here for Stanley is that he's just making the 2 creatures he has larger, and he's still losing this race as Michael is able to go very, very wide and still evasive with the two flyers in hand.
How about a second copy of River Herald's Boon? At some point, these add up.
Okay, yeah, they're definitely getting more problematic, but Michael just played that Raptor Hatchling. The Raptor Hatchling can just jump in front of one of these 2 Merfolk should Stanley attack. Neither of them trample,
Yeah, this is where you really want sort of a way of getting through. I mean, one with the wind would be ideal. Looks like there's at least 1 copy of it in Stanley Pace's deck. Not necessarily a surprise. It is common. This is one of the combos that's easier to assemble in the format.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a great way for Stanley to potentially win. If he puts the one with the wind, should he draw it, on the Jade Guardian, that'll be a 2-turn clock in the air. Granted, Michael has 2 flyers that he can potentially block with, but that is a line of victory. And when you're in these type of positions, remember, you're looking to win and not to not lose.
Well, the pace of these games, no pun intended for Stanley here, not quite as quick as we saw on our other match in the feature match area this round in round 13. But you know what? I don't think that necessarily means that we should write off this format as being a slow one just yet. All these guys, they've got a lot of action going on. It's just a matter of figuring out the execution. And wow, if you're looking for a thing that can potentially swing the game, Tishana, Voice of Thunder, could potentially do it. It is a Merfolk, but in some respects, that's the least exciting element of what Tishana has going on, because with 3 creatures in play, comes into play, he's going to be drawing 3 cards. And Tishana's power and toughness is equal to the number of cards in hand. Michael Hopkins here having a bit of a think, though. Does he have some counter magic for this one?
Well, he has a run aground in his hand, so he could run aground in response to the trigger to make Stanley draw fewer cards, as well as a nice little tempo loss. In fact, what we might see is run aground on the Water Trap Weaver. Tishana's only going to draw 2 cards for Stanley. Tishana's going to be a 3/3 then, and that means the crew with, as a 3/3 could attack into...
Yeah, it would be a 4/4 because there would also be the Merfolk that had been bounced itself.
Oh, no, the run aground puts it on top of the library.
Oh, I apologize. Yes, sorry.
So Michael would have multiple 3-power creatures that could attack into the Tishana, but not the Jade Guardian so much.
As things stand, though, does let Tishana draw some cards for Stanley Pace.
Okay, that almost certainly means Michael is not going to use the run aground this turn, or if he does, I think he lets Stanley draw an extra card for no reason. Yeah, and so no run aground here.
All right, Hopkins, plenty of land to work with, has not found any of his big looting creatures yet. But now we do see the Deadeye Quartermaster. 2/2 for 4, so not an exciting rate on the creature itself, but lets you search your deck for either an equipment or a vehicle, reveal it, put it in your hand. And in this case, well, he's got a pretty good one in Fell Flagship. That will have a lot of pirates to improve. Fell Flagship, the vehicle that lets you give all your pirates +1 power. It's a 3-mana, 3/3 vehicle, crew 3. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card.
Oh, great card to get here. Are every single one of Michael's creatures pirates except for that Raptor Hatchling? I think so. Yeah, and that's going to change the clock quite a bit. Instead of just hitting for 3 in the air, he's going to be hitting for 5 now.
I like it. Michael Hopkins' board looking increasingly scary here.
So I think Michael's game plan, holding the run aground, was going to be for a flyer on Stanley's side, because Right now, 5 damage in the air is a very quick clock.
Yeah, even having missed Explore on the Siren Lookout so long ago, it still has 2 power at this point in the game. It's a 2-2 flyer. We also have the other flyer getting in for 3 here. Stanley Pace going down to 7. And at this point, there's also potential for Michael Hopkins to kind of just attack around all of the creatures that Stanley Pace has, just with such a dominating board position.
Right, and if you're in Stanley's position, you have to think, well, Michael paused when I cast Tishana, so what does that mean? You know, there are multiple bounce spells in the format, and so I think Stanley has to be thinking of that the entire time.
And the Rowdy Crew with Trample, every point of power on that one kind of helping out too. Yes, there's a lot of counters on some of these Merfolk, but one bounce spell could make life really fiddly for Stanley Pace, who's already on the back foot.
I think that might have been a Rivers Rebuke. I didn't catch that fully, though. Does he have a Rebuke in his deck list by chance?
Let's have a little look. He does not.
Okay, so it was definitely a spell of some sort.
Well, this is the straightforward set of attacks. The Flyer's getting in, not threatening lethal on the face of things, though if there's maybe another Stormfleet Pyromancer post-combat, that would be enough to close things out.
So we might see a Crushing Canopy, Wind Strider, just a bounce spell of sorts. We'll see if Stanley can find a way to get out of this. Okay, so it's going to be a run aground here on the Stormfleet Aerialist. He doesn't want to give Michael more value by targeting the Siren Lookout.
I can understand that.
Aerialist, the bigger creature anyways.
Every little piece buying a little bit of time here for Stanley Pace.
Yeah, but that's the only problem with his play. It is only buying him some time. He's not attacking in. He's not getting any damage in. He has to hold back the ground creatures just, to save face. And so run aground is basically just buying a little time. It wasn't a Rivers Rebuke. It was an Air Elemental that he drew.
Air Elemental's a good one too. 4 damage in the air, which, of course, alongside that Siren Lookout would be enough to close out this game if Stanley Pace doesn't have something to say about that. Jared Calabrese picking up the first game in this series up against Phil Lee on our middle table. So Stanley Pace maybe buoyed a little bit by seeing a solid play from his teammate just to his right.
From our PTQ this morning, final standings are posted especially for pods where...
Now Stanley has 4 cards in hand, but remember, those could just be lands he's holding up for Tishana to be a little bit larger.
Those are already posted.
All right, well, more bounce spells. We have got them.
Perilous Voyage.
Yeah, that one just enough to keep things working here for Stanley Pace.
The problem is Michael still gets to develop out the Air Elemental and the Stormfleet Aerialist.
There's the Air Elemental, passes things back, keeping mana up.
Michael still has access to that runner ground. I think I liked running out the Aerialist there, as it would be a 3-power creature. Lethal on its own, but I understand. Maybe he's holding up, the runner ground in case Stanley drew a Savage Stomp, for instance, to kill the Air Elemental.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting one, watching how people play when they're well ahead. Often, that's the point where people can get a little bit reckless.
Right.
And they're the losses that hurt the most, the ones where you realize that you perhaps got a little ahead of yourself and gave yourself an opportunity to lose where otherwise you really should have won. In that instance, we saw Michael Hopkins being a little bit careful, but still very much getting the job done. Looks like Brian Wilkins also picking up the first game, so we have a whole bunch of shuffling and sideboarding going on, and these players figuring out, communicating with one another, just to make sure that they get the best choices during sideboarding. Of course, the entire way through these matches, in principle, they can get advice from their teammates, but if everyone else is playing, it doesn't necessarily help anybody to try and disrupt too many games in order to get a little bit of advice. Ideally, you want your teammates making good decisions in their games, you making good decisions in yours, and let that be that.
Yeah, you got to find the sweet spot between, how much input do you need to give your teammate versus, well, you should just trust them and know that their gameplay is going to be solid in the first place. But there's always room for, both of those.
And we will, of course, jump back to whichever game is ready first. This is our Time Walk match. The match between the Peach Garden Oath and Sperling, Rietzl and Williams was over pretty quickly, all told. Not too much of a a worry for the Peach Garden Oath. They were able to lock that one up comparatively straightforwardly.
Yeah, 10-2 going into these rounds. Still live for top 8, or rather top 4 should they win, and we know the PGO did.
Yeah, not much longer before we get to those elimination rounds. If you are looking for a different take on how Ixalan works out, then strongly recommend that you pay attention to the draft that we have going on, because in some respects, these team sealed decks, they're your best case scenario for how your draft might go, and kind of team draft decks is how you win when a draft goes a little off the rails.
Right.
Because often what tends to happen in a team draft, where you've got teammates alternating with opponents as you're sat down to draft, is that everyone is trying to take away cards from their opponent's decks, and that means that potentially everyone ends up with a deck that overall power level, or at least synergy level, is quite a bit lower.
Yeah, you need to take note of cards you're passing as well. Well, if you open a charging Monstrosaur, but instead you take a rare or a mythic like Hostage Taker, you want to tell your team, hey, did you see that charging Monstrosaur second pick? Probably not. Or, third pick? Probably not, because I would imagine the person to your left or right is going to take it, depending if you get past it. Or
Yeah, gradually, in principle, team draft teams, if they've really been paying attention, can more or less map out almost exactly what the opposing team is working with. We'll get a chance to see 4 teams in those elimination stages working every angle to try and navigate the Ixalan draft format in a slightly different way than we've seen it thus far this weekend.
Yeah, this is actually the second to last round of Swiss before we cut to the top 4. As remember, there are only 5 rounds of sealed today before we do the top 4 drafts.
I must admit, I'm pretty excited to see how these last few rounds play out, and of course how the drafts go as one team works its way toward becoming Grand Prix Providence champion.
I don't know if you caught it there, but Michael Hopkins did, in fact, sideboard in that second Cannonade.
Oh, you just have to. It's one of those cards that I think that the 1-1 split between main and sideboard is about right. You will have matchups where in the main deck, your Fiery Cannonade, which of course at instant speed for 3 mana deals 2 damage to all non-pirate creatures. There'll be some matchups where your opponent's just got a whole bunch of pirates,
right,
and you feel a little bit foolish. But on the occasions like this one, where your opponent is playing an entirely different tribe, well, you can get a whole lot going. We're going to get a chance to see Jared Calabrese against Phil Lee here. Calabrese having picked up game 1 and facing down red-green. Ignore the fact that there happens to be a Merfolk in play in the early turn of the game. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're facing a red-green Merfolk deck. It just so happens that Deep-Root Warrior, just one of the premium 2s in the format, you'll run it in green most of the time.
Yeah, it's crazy how many great 2-drops there are in this format. I mean, we see one on both sides of the board here, Adonto Vanguard and that Deep-Root Warrior.
Yeah, it's Adonto Vanguard, great on attacks, the 1-1 that gets +2 when attacking on the power, and of course you can spend 4 life to give it indestructible, which means that it's a very fiddly one to block in most circumstances. I guess that in principle, if your opponent's attacking you with some truly gigantic dinosaurs, sometimes it's effective to block and pay 4,
right,
rather than even using it as an attacker, but that's something we've not seen quite so often.
The dream, you're blocking a Brontodon with it, perhaps?
Yeah, there's definitely some big old dinos, though many of the big dinos do have trample, and with just 1 toughness, not necessarily where you want to be. All right, the follow-up play after attacks there from Phil Lee is Tashani's Wayfinder sees a Thrash of Raptors on the top, so that means that there will be a +1/+1 counter for the Merfolk. Maybe we are on red-green Merfolk. Maybe I'm just wrong.
Well, he does have the Thrash on top, so presumably he has more dinosaurs than just that one.
I would imagine so. Passes things back to Jared, who gets stuck in with his 1-1, which quickly becomes a 3-1 on attacks, and Phil Lee says, no, I don't fancy blocking that too much.
All right, looking at Phil's hand, he opted to keep the Thrash on top, though he does not have a 4th mana source. I see a Blossom Dryad, but that kind of takes off his turn. I might have been tempted to bin the Thrash of Raptors, especially since he also has a Snapping Sailback in his hand.
And a nice one there coming down for Jared Calabrese. Embassy of Sunrise, he gets to explore, but his 2-1 creature that now got a +1/+1 counter to go to 3-2 has first strike, so dominating the red zone. If Phil Lee wants to attack in, he's not going to get too much done. Just casts Blossoming Dryad and passes things back.
Yeah, now we see the problem with keeping that Thrash on top. I mean, he wanted that dinosaur because he already had a few in his hand, and a 5-3 trample does seem very, very good, but that Emissary of Sunrise just stops all of his creatures, and the Blossom Dryad kind of takes a turn off instead of being a land.
All right, Adano Vanguard getting stuck in, and I believe that Jared has paid the 4 life there so that his creature stays around. Meanwhile, Deeproot Warrior going to the graveyard for Phil Lee.
Yeah, that's not a bad trade for Phil. 4 life for that Deeproot Warrior. That's as much damage as you could expect to get in with it for the rest of the game anyways. And remember, with that Emissary of Sunrise, it just doesn't attack very well anyway.
Paladin of the Bloodstained, the follow-up there. The 3/2 for 4 mana that also brings along with a 1/1 Vampire with lifelink. So Jared's Black-White Vampires deck gradually going wide. This is what Vampires are want to do. Thrash of Raptors coming down on the other side of things. Phil Lee currently just with a 3/3 Thrash of Raptors, turning into a 5/3, of course, with Trample if he gets a second dinosaur on the battlefield.
Yeah, still getting slightly punished for that Thrash on top as opposed to in the graveyard, but his board state is fine. I think he drew a Colossal Dreadmaw for the turn, and we know he has that Snapping Sailback in hand as well. So if he can hit a few lands, his creatures are going to outclass Jared's. But the problem is Jared gets to be aggressive here, and if Phil falls too far behind, it's just going to be hard to get back, especially if he continues to miss land drops.
All right, so 6 damage going through here on attacks and a trade for his Paladin of the Bloodstained against Tishana's Wayfinder. And that before our spell for the turn, Call the Feast. And this is a really cool one in this exact matchup. Against dinosaurs, if there's not a whole lot of trample going on, this represents just so much time for the Vampires deck. He can just throw a life-linking Vampire in the way of some of these big old bodies, and that means that he's not taking a huge amount of damage, he's in fact gaining a little bit of life potentially. Meanwhile, if there's 1 or 2 evasive or sneaky little threats in there, he can get something going. And if there's one of the big, powerful payoff cards for Vampires, he's now got such a wide board that he can make all sorts of great things happen. Bishop of the Bloodstained next turn would be absolutely filthy.
Yeah, again, Phil just having to develop out another Thrash of Raptors here, which is not even very good versus the Adanto Vanguard and that Emissary of Sunrise. He drew another Snapping Sailback for the turn, but again, he's been missing on those land drops ever since keeping that Thrash of Raptors on top from that original Explore.
I mean, the Thrash of Raptors, because there's 2 of them, each of them it gets to be friends with the other.
Right.
They're both 5/3 tramplers now rather than simply 3/3s, but it's the 3 on the back end that's the problem right now. You can see here, Jared Calabrese, unafraid to attack. One of his creatures has first strike. The other one can gain indestructibility. Both of them will trade with a Raptor if blocked.
And I think here Phil just has to double block the Emissary of Sunrise. Yes, first strike will kill one of your Thrasher Raptors, but then at least you get to trade away with the 3/2 first striker that's really hurting you right now.
Yeah, if you're going to block with one, you may as well block with both. It looks like that's the conclusion that Phil has come to as well. All right, so Phil Lee taking 3, going to 8, and what's the follow-up here from Jared Calabrese? Already won game 1 against this opponent. A couple more Vampires coming down, each individually not too scary, but just the sheer quantity of creatures that Jared Calabrese has going on here is kind of where Phil Lee's problem starts and ends.
And this is where you have to smell something a little bit fishy if you're in Jared's position. Phil's been missing on lands, and he has a grip full of cards still. He just plays his 5th mana source for the turn and passes. Well, that could spell multiple things, but specifically in the Red-Greens Dinos deck, you're thinking about that Snapping Sailback, which of course we know Phil has too. But it might be too late here for Phil, as Jared has gone super wide and already put Phil down to 8 life. So we might start seeing some all-out attacks, because if you're in Jared's position, you're thinking, okay, well, if it is Snapping Sailback, he has to tap his Blossom Dryad, so I can still go super wide here. Well, that might shore things up in short order.
Yeah, we have just even more Vampires on one side of things. Anointed Deacon, the 3/3 for 5, means that at the beginning of combat, Jared Calabrese gets to give one of his Vampires +2 power until the end of turn. And one of the Vampires that's best to do that with is one of these largely sacrificial, it must be said, 1/1 lifelinkers. 3 points of damage or 3 points of lifelink involved is enough that it really does turn a corner for the Vampires decks that are looking to actually close out games.
Well, this is one way for Phil to come back. Jared's a little bit scared here, only attacking with 2 creatures, so Phil can flash in that Snapping Sailback, block one of the creatures, eat it, grow the Sailback, and just either trade away for the other creature or have Jared lose 4 life. But, if Jared had attacked with all creatures here, Phil would be looking in much worse position.
So Snapping Sailback, for those of you who've not played with it yet, of course the set did only come out on Friday. 4/4 Flash Dinosaur for 5 mana, and it's got Enrage. Every time this uncommon takes a point of damage, on each instance of damage, should I say, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So with this set of blocks, the Sailback will be growing from a 4/4 after combat into a 5/5. And Thrasher Raptors also jumping in the way of the other attacker here from Jared Calabrese. Basically, this is Phil Lee protecting his life total where he can. And if there are more Sailbacks or similar, then Phil Lee might be able to get something going here.
Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit confused as to why the Skybladed Legion didn't get in there as well. Flying, of course.
And here, Jared Calabrese, deciding that his life total a little precarious, does not want to keep along for the ride his Adano Vanguard.
Yeah, a little bit surprised on that as well. I think you'd rather just keep the 3-power creature on the board as you are trying to go wide here.
I mean, a different option, I guess, that Calabrese could have used if he'd sniffed out that Sailback was to pump the Adanto Vanguard's power. So it would have been attacking as a 5-power creature. And that would have meant that potentially, I guess, it might have secured the same trade against the Thrasher Raptors, but you wouldn't also have had this Sailback with an extra +1/+1 counter on it.
Yeah, Jared's still in good shape here. Again, with Phil passing with 5 mana, you're going to sniff some kind of trick out, whether it be Pounce or another Sailback. Could be an unfriendly fire. Lots of things that the red-green deck could have, but you're doing a good job of going wide right now.
Oh. Oof. Powerful, stall-breaking dinosaurs. Jared Calabrese has some too. Imperial Aerosaur, it's a 3/3 flyer for 4 that when it comes into play, you get to give target creature, it doesn't have to be a dinosaur, flying and +1/+1 until the end of turn. Now, if you had, I don't know, for example, one of the bigger vampires knocking around, say an Anointed Deacon, you could just jump that one, give it +2 power as well, and have some very big swings in the air here.
Yeah, it looks like Phil actually has access to a Pounce, though, for the turn, and that's going to be a huge beating.
Yeah. Anytime that you're able to set up a fight when you also have an enraged creature, things can get kind of out of hand here. So here there's a Pounce in response to the trigger of the Anointed Deacon, that meaning that before it resolves, he's able to get a fight in. And yes, there's lifelink here involved, so Jared Calabrese will get to gain a little bit of life. Snapping Sailback gains a counter, and in addition to all of this going on, we've not got too much working out for Jared in terms of attacks this turn. He was aiming to get a huge swing in with that flyer, and that doesn't now seem to be the case.
Right, and I'm interested to knowing why Phil is killing the Bishop Soldier here and not the Anointed Deacon, as the Deacon is the thing that's pressuring Phil's life total.
Well, a mystery for the ages. As things stand, Phil Lee just taking a single point there from the flyer, but now there's the Aerosaur that is going to be able to get stuck in each and every turn in the air. 3/3 flyer, now that it's coming into playability, is all resolved. Phil Lee with a lot of work to do here. No clear path through. So we've just heard that in a weird turn of events, because the Peach Garden Oath match finished so fast and this one's still going, we're actually going to jump from Time Walk into live Magic and still get a chance to see some more of Stanley Pace is Calabrese, Brian Wilkins against Hopkins, Lee and Lodra. Hopkins won the match against Stanley Pace 2-0. Now we're getting a chance to see this is the deciding game of the match. Brian Wilkins and Juan Lodra still playing away. Jared Calabrese's won his match. Michael Hopkins has won his. This will decide it all, and we have black, white, dino, vampire, somethings, but ultimately, wow, we timed it just right. Stormfleet Pyromancer there for the final points for Brian Wilkins in order to go 11-2 as we close out this round here in round 13. Nice moment to jump across.
Yeah, wow. So Stormfleet Pyromancer are going to finish off that last 2 points of damage, even if the trampling Dreadmaw, didn't get through.
Wowzers, trousers. That all of our matches from the feature match area, and you could see the sort of air of celebration coming through as that Stormfleet Pyromancer was able to close things out. Sometimes that little extra shock, just enough to finish things off. Wow, I like that quite a bit. But we have another team advancing to 11-2. 10-3 for Hopkins, Lee, and Lodra means that they're potentially now out of contention for the knockout stages, but still great work by them. We'll have more Magic for you for round 14, the last of our sealed deck rounds here, right after these messages.